Michael Franzese grew up as the son of the notorious underboss of New York's infamous Colombo crime family. He lived a life of power, luxury, and violence until an innocent young woman walked into Michael's life. Her beauty captivated him, and her faith in God brought him home. Come along on Michael's journey from mob to prison to brave new life. It's a story with a powerful lesson. No one is so bad that they can't be forgiven. Please give a warm harvest welcome to Michael Franzese.
Thank you.
Hey, Michael.
Thank you.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
Now, is it Franzese? I've been watching your film. There's a new film that's going to be coming out about your life. And when is that film coming out?
Halloween night, October 31st.
Oh, very appropriate. And they're showing old news reports from the 80s, and they're calling you Michael Franzese. And how do you pronounce your last name?
It's really Franzese. But the more
Franzese.
Italian way is Franzese.
Yeah.
So either way is good.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
Yeah.
Everybody wants me to say that all the time.
We just like the way you say it. You say it with authenticity.
Yeah,
well, let me tell you a little bit about Michael if you've never heard his story. This guy has one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard. And the reason we brought him here today is just so you can hear an amazing testimony. But also, I'm going to interview Michael at the Crusade this year on Friday night, August 15th. So a lot of people are going to hear it.
Thank you.
But Michael was a member of the Colombo crime family. Are there 5 crime families, or were there 5 crime families?
Well, there still are. 5 in New York.
Okay.
And there's normally like 9 around the country.
So it's like Colombo, Lucchese,
Genovese,
Bonanno,
yeah, and Gambino.
and Gambino.
Yes.
And you were in the Colombo crime
Colombo,
family.
yes.
So this is what we would often call the mafia, but really the better term is La Cosa Nostra.
La Cosa Nostra, and it's kind of the American version of the mafia. It means this thing of ours,
Yeah.
and it's similar to the mafia in Italy, but if you're a made member of the mafia in Italy, you're not automatically made here in America, and vice versa. But
So you were effectively raised in a mafia family. Your father, Sonny Franzese, was what they call an enforcer. What is an enforcer in the mob?
well, you know, there's different levels of involvement in that life, and my dad was one of the guys that did the heavy work. I mean, that's how he kind of made his reputation, and you know, unfortunately, a lot of times it was violent. But you know, he was known originally as an enforcer, and then he rose to the position of underboss.
Yeah.
He was underboss to Joe Colombo.
So that's sort of second in command.
Yes.
In a La Cosa Nostra infrastructure. And he actually has been a part of what you call this life of ours, right?
Yes.
For 65 years.
Right.
So he is probably the oldest living member of the mob today.
He is. At 97 years old, he's the oldest living made man, and unfortunately, he's the oldest living federal inmate right now because he's still in prison.
Still incarcerated.
Yeah.
So you were kind of moving up the ranks. You were called in one news report the handsome young prince, the yuppie Don. I don't think you like being called the yuppie Don.
I didn't like that at all. No.
But it was the 80s, you know, and so there you were young, you were called the Prince of the Mafia, you were in Fortune magazine's top mob bosses, you were number 18, I think John Gotti was on that list as well.
Right, John was number 13 at that
And you were the youngest on the list. So you were raised in this culture. In fact, you didn't understand fully what your dad did for a living. You just looked up to your father like any son would. But when he came to the baseball games, he came with an entourage. Tell us what it was like when Sonny Franzese came to the baseball game of Michael Franzese.
Well, my dad was always very supportive. I was a jock in school, and my dad would never miss a game, no matter what he was doing. Mob business, legit business, he'd show up. And baseball was really my sport, so this happened so often. I'd be playing baseball, I'd be up to bat, and I would look at a corner of my eye, here comes Dad. He'd always drive up in a big black Cadillac or a black Lincoln, that's the car he drove, and he'd always come late, so he never went into the parking lot. He'd always pull right up to the field.
Right.
And, you know, he gets out of the car, always dressed sharp in his suit. My dad would never dress any other way, always had 5 or 6 guys with him. And so they'd get out of the car, start walking onto the field, and Greg, I'm telling you, the umpire took one look at that crew and would never call strike 3 on me when he saw that. I used to say, hey, Dad, you're very good for my batting average. I played football. Nobody would tackle me when he was in the stands. I always say it's good to have a dad in the mob when you play sports.
Oh, boy. That is funny. So you grew up idolizing your father, and then when he was arrested, you thought he was framed. You thought he was innocent. And there came a point in your life where you decided you wanted to, I don't know if we'd say join the family business, but you decided you wanted to become a made man. How old were you when that happened, and what prompted you to want to enter this life?
Well, my dad was, arrested, indicted, and tried for conspiracy to rob banks. He was supposedly masterminded a nationwide string of bank robberies. And I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University at that time. My dad did not want me to be into this life. But when he got a 50-year sentence, he was 50 when he went in. I figured he would die in prison. So Joe Colombo was the boss, and he got very close to me. He kind of took me under his wing.
This is Joe Colombo of the Colombo crime family, who you grew up knowing as an uncle, not as a mob boss, but it was like Uncle.
It's like Uncle Joe.
Uncle Joe.
Yeah. And so he kind of took me under his wing when Dad went away, and I was very influenced by a lot of the guys. And I went to see my dad in prison. We were in Leavenworth visiting room, and I said, Dad, if I don't get out on the street and help you out, you're going to die in here. And he was upset, but he knew my mind was made up. I had lost interest in school, and he said, son, if you're going to be on the street, I want you to do it the right way. And in his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. So at that point, he proposed me for membership in the family.
Your dad did ask you a question, though. He asked you a question if you were prepared to do something. What was that question?
Well, it was funny because, Greg, in that life, you're not supposed to talk about the life to anybody outside of that life, and my dad wouldn't violate that policy even with me. He just asked me one question, and it kind of surprised me. He said, if you ever had to kill anybody, would you be able to do it? And I never had that question proposed to me, but I thought about it for a minute, and I said, Dad, under the right circumstances, I think I can do it. And he said, well, that's the right answer. And he said, go home and we'll be in touch with you.
So you're not a made man yet. When you enter into the mob, what are you called? What are you?
You're a recruit.
You're a recruit. Right. But you're doing their business. They say do this and you do this, and that's the way you make your way up to becoming a good fella or a made man, correct?
Well, when I was told after that meeting with my dad, they sent for me and I met with the acting boss because Joe Colombo had been shot and he eventually died from the wounds.
I was going to ask you about that. So Joe Colombo, who you knew as Uncle Joe, is at a big rally in New York City, right?
Right.
And he's speaking and he's hit. There's a hit put on him. Right. It was probably ordered or allowed by some of the other bosses or from the other families.
Well, they were upset with the fact that he was out there so much, publicly with this Italian-American Civil Rights League that he was doing, and everybody kind of turned on him, and he got shot.
He went too public.
Rally. Exactly.
And they like to kind of operate under the radar a little bit, don't they? So now Colombo's been shot, and you have moved forward, and the day comes for you to become a made man. Now, the ceremony that you go through is really strange, and I think even Christians would be fascinated by a phrase that they use. You go into a room, and what happens? And this is in your new film called God the Father, coming out on Halloween. It's a dramatized, and we're going to show you a scene from the film in a few moments. But so what happens when you become officially a made man? What's the ceremony?
Well, after about 18 months, when you have to prove yourself worthy, and in their eyes, I did that. And it was Halloween night, 1975, when myself and 5 other guys were called into a room. And that night, we all took an oath and became made members. And it was a very solemn ceremony, dimly lit room late at night. It was made to be very imposing. They want you to know what you're getting involved in. And I was called into a room where the boss was seated at the head of like a horseshoe configuration, the underboss and the consigliere to his left and right, and all the captains were alongside of them. Walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, and I held out my hand. He took a knife and cut my finger. Some blood dropped on the floor because this is a blood oath. And I cupped my hands. He took a picture of a saint, a Catholic altar card, put it in my hands and lit it aflame. And it didn't hurt. It was merely symbolic. It burned quick. And he said, tonight, Michael Franzese, you are born again into a new life, into La Cosa Nostra. And he said, violate what you know about this life, betray your brothers, and you'll die and burn in hell like the saint is burning in your hands. Wow. And that's the oath.
So now we fast forward, and you become this prince of the mafia, as the media described you. You were making $8 to $10 million a week in combined income from the gas business. You had kind of a scam going that was making a lot of money, and at the height of your operation, you're selling $500 million worth of gas a month. You had a jet, a helicopter. You had homes in Florida, Los Angeles, New York City. You had 300 guys under you, including members of the Russian mob. You were called an earner. What's an earner?
In our family, we had probably 115 made guys that actually took the oath. Out of that, maybe 15 of us were real earners that were bringing money into the family. And I was fortunate, Greg, I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business and went on to make a lot of money. I was very aggressive on the street. I worked 24/7. And so I was in that category at that point. And, as a result of that, in that life, not unlike the real world, money is power. And so, they made me a capo regime. I was a captain, and I had a bunch of men.
So, captain, okay, looking at the infrastructure of the mob, so you have the boss, you have the underboss. Then is there the captain, or are there multiple captains?
You have, in our family at that time, we had 15 capo regimes or captains. So it's boss, underboss, capo regime.
And your father said to you later, if you would have effectively played your cards right, you would have been the boss of the Colombo crime family. So with being an earner, you were on your way to that top position, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, they were grooming me to be either boss or underboss at one point.
But you didn't know that you were being watched by the FBI. There was a 14-member FBI task force assigned to you in particular.
It was it was kind of unprecedented, and I didn't know this as it was going on, but they had indicted me, and I went to trial 4 times, and I beat every case. I beat Giuliani on a big case. I was the first major mob
Later
guy
to
he
become
indicted.
the mayor of New York City.
Yes, and I was the first major mob guy that was indicted under the RICO statute, and I was acquitted in that case. And so
RICO statute stands for what? RICO.
It was a Racketeering, Influence, Corrupt Organization
And that's
Act.
in many ways how they really crippled the mob.
Greg, they were indicting everybody for racketeering, and the sentences, 50 years, 100 years.
Right.
I mean, in the courtroom, when I was getting arraigned on that charge, Rudy Giuliani was there. And he came to me and he stood toe-to-toe and he said, if I convict you on this case, Michael, you're going to get double what your father got. I'm giving you 100 years. And I'll never forget, I said, hey, Rudy, bring it on. Beat your guys 4 times already. Let's go for round 5. And I got to tell you, that's the dumbest thing you could ever do. They don't need more incentive to come after you. But fortunately, after a 7-month trial, I was acquitted in that case. I was a lead defendant. Some of my co-defendants were convicted. They got 30 years and up. If I lose that case, I'm done.
But your day was still coming, wasn't it? You were going
Yes.
to be convicted and sent to prison. But I want to go now to your film for a moment, because there's a scene where you were so successful. You were such an earner that some of the bosses are suspicious, like, what's Franzese up to? And so you're called to this mysterious meeting, and we're going to look at the screen right now, and we're going to bring down the big screen. And this is a scene from Michael's upcoming film called God the Father, where you're called into a meeting to be challenged for what you're up to at this point in your life.
That's not our way, Michael. We go separate the way they asked. We live by the oath. The oath and the life are more important than us. I'm going to go, and you must follow. You must. You know what, Dad? I've been listening to you my whole life. I'm gonna go. But I want you to know I don't like it. I don't like it one little bit.
I get a call a little later on from Jimmy Angelina, another captain in the family. He says, meet me on 18th Avenue in Brooklyn. He says, be there at 11 o'clock or so, around there. I said, all right. I drive in from Long Island, and I meet him on 18th Avenue in a spot that we had designated. And he said, park your car, drive with me. And we start to drive, and I'm waiting for Jimmy to tell me something. Now, I know Jimmy all my life, my whole life. We were captains together. And he's kind of stoic that night, you know, and I'm waiting for him to talk to me, tell me about this meeting, what's going on. He don't say a word. I get out of the car, and I'll never forget, it was probably a 30-yard walk to this basement we had to enter. And that was either the longest or the shortest walk of my life, because I really believed that that could have been the last moments of my life. I didn't know what was going to happen when I got on the other side of that door. That night became so vivid to me, and I started to pray. I didn't have any relationship with God at all, but I realized something. When you think you're going to meet your maker, you start to pray. And we get to the door. My knees were weak, my heart pounding, through my chest. And I didn't want to show them that I was afraid. Why didn't I cut and run? I don't know. I'm walking in, I remember, your perception is your reality, and unfortunately, I've been through this before with other people. It's part of the life. But I'm looking around at the setup. Who's to my left? Who's to my right? Come in. Sit down.
I've given you the exact percentage I promised, and I've generated that money myself. And I've shared it very generously. Now, how is it when the press say something about you guys? It's a lie. When they say something about me, it's true. Come on.
Not according to your father.
Should have never got my father involved in this. He doesn't know my operation. I protected him for his own good.
So,
Still gets me nervous.
what's that?
Still gets me nervous when I think about that.
Right. So you found out later, your buddy that you drove over there with, what was his name?
Jimmy Angelino.
Is he still alive?
No.
A lot of these guys are no longer still alive, are they?
Greg, one of the unfortunate parts about that life is that you're in trouble, you don't really know it. Your best friend walks you into a room, you don't walk out again. And unfortunately, I've seen that in my life. And Jimmy Angelino, who I knew all my life, was a captain with me. About 3 years after I had this incident, they walked him into a room and he never walked out again.
Yeah. So you found out later that your father didn't do you any favors in that room, because he went and met with the guys before you did, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
He didn't do you any favors. So this is where effectively you realize your father had let you down, and then a little bit later, your father put a contract out on you to have you killed.
He went along with it, yes.
He went along with it. So you find out your father has betrayed you, but yet God allowed this, because through the betrayal of your earthly father, who you idolized, it caused you to realize you needed help, and it turned you to your Father in heaven who loved you, yes, who you committed your life to when you were in prison, correct?
Yeah, Greg, it's amazing how God works, and obviously now, ever since I accepted the Lord and my faith in the last 20 years, I realized that we go through this process, and I idolized my dad, and I was so much a product of that life that this incident happened really before I came to Christ, but I know God had to use that incident to break that tie that I had with my father, because I realized if my own father can betray me, what kind of life really is this? Yeah. And but God used that incident years later to, like I said, to break that tie, and made me realize that really the only person in life we can really rely on 100%, who'll never let us down, is God.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you're in a prison cell. Guard gives you a Bible.
Yeah.
You don't want to read that Bible.
Threw it against the wall. Yeah.
But then you picked it up later, and you opened it up, and a verse jumped out at you. Because here you're thinking, how can I live? What's my future? And a verse jumped out from the Bible to you. What was that verse?
Yeah, I was destroyed that night. So much had gone on, and I figured that was it. I was going to lose everything that I had. And I opened it up to the book of Proverbs. Now, I'd never read the Bible before. I grew up a Catholic. In Catholic school, you don't read the Bible. You read the catechism. The priest reads the Bible. So I opened it up, and I opened it to Proverbs, and I started reading it. I said, wow, this book is brilliant. And I'm a pretty analytical guy. You're on the street. You don't buy into things too easy. I always say, they're not selling me to Brooklyn Bridge when I'm paying attention. And I start to read Proverbs, and I said, man, this book is brilliant. And so it really attracted my attention. And then I came to a verse that it just knocked me out. And I realized that's the first time God spoke to my heart that I listened, because I was desperate. and it said Proverbs 16:7, which says, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with him. Now, I was a 1 foot in, 1 foot out Christian. I accepted Christ because I wanted my sins forgiven, but I wasn't willing to surrender Jesus because I didn't understand the concept of surrendering my life. I'm a mob guy. I'm in control of my life. So I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It was self-serving when I became a Christian. And I got convicted that night because it was almost as if God was with me in that 6x8 cell, and he said, were your ways really pleasing to me, or is this all a facade for you? And you don't really lie to yourself when you're in that situation. And then, I had nothing but enemies that night. The government was against me. My father betrayed me. The boss of my family, a contract. I'm sitting in that cell, and I'm alone. And it's almost as if the Lord has said, I know you got enemies, but you come with me, and I can take care of that. And I always say this, and people, you realize this. You can read a verse in the Bible 20 times, and it'll have 20 different meanings to you because God speaks through that verse according to your needs at that moment. And I really needed to hear that, and it really encouraged me, and it started to put me on the pathway to Jesus, who is my hero and my idol in life now. That's who it really is.
Well, I know you want to hear more, and you're going to hear more Friday night at the Crusade, August 15th. But if you want to know more about Michael's story, it's in a book here. It's called Blood Covenant. And also in our radio broadcast this last month, we were giving away another book that Michael wrote called The Good, the Bad, and the Forgiven. So one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard. Let's thank Michael Franzese for coming.
I want to say one more
Go ahead.
thing. Thank you. I spent, during that time, I spent 29 months and 7 days in the hole. It was 24/7, 6x8 cell, me and God. And during that time, all I did was read. I had books sent in and everything else. And I want to tell you how I met Greg. I had a Sony Walkman, and I never heard of Greg. But I started to listen to the radio, and his broadcast came on. And I've said this, from the time I got out of prison, I wanted to meet him because that soothing voice, the way he interpreted Scripture, Greg brought me so much closer to the Lord during those 3 years. And when I got out, I said, I have to meet this man. And I was blessed to meet him, and we become dear friends. And he helped me so much in that jail cell. He didn't even know it, but he had a big part in bringing me to the Lord.